welcome to the Agtually podcast, where we learn about farming and food from the people who actually grow and process it. I'm your host, Sheridan. Join me as I learn as much as I possibly can about agriculture and food production. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we will be learning a little bit about the history of farming in Arizona from Darrel Kuiper. Darrel is a multi-generational farmer who has been involved in dairying, ranching, and crop farming. He's lived in Arizona the majority of his life and has watched as Arizona and its agriculture has changed over the decades. Darrel, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I'm excited to learn more about farming in Arizona and how it's impacted this state. First though, will you please tell us briefly about your history and background in agriculture?
Sure. Okay, so I'm a fourth generation dairy and farm family guy from both sides of my grandparents. And both of my grandparents were immigrants from the Netherlands. So I'm Dutch, and that kind of goes with dairy and farming that supports the feed for dairy. My father was born in Wisconsin, so he spent the first 35 years of his life there as a dairyman and farmer. He was from a large family of 14, and he was, I think, 11th in the birth order, and so he had a lot of older brothers go off to the war, World War II, and he was immersed into managing the farm at a very young age. He tragically lost my grandmother, his mother, in an accident. They had motorized her wash machine wringer since she had so many kids and a lot of laundry, and it caught her kerchief and choked her to death. And so my grandfather had a very difficult time, an emotional breakdown, and it was post-depression years. Things were very tough anyways in farming. So my father went through school 9 grades and then really got to have a lot of responsibility at a young age. And with that, he saw his father not only go through the grief of that, but tough times with the depression, and they lost 2 of 3 farms that my grandfather had owned. And I don't know if they milked cows on all 3, but they thought that my grandfather, Henry Kuiper, was maybe one of the largest dairymen in Wisconsin with 14 kids, and you were hand milking. He had up to 60 cows milking, which was very large in those days. My father, once he met my mother and started his own operation, separated from the family, he rented a dairy, a smaller dairy, and my first years of remembering that was in a little community called Union Grove, Wisconsin. And I think he milked maybe 25 or 30 cows, but he grew the feed for them and did other farming and custom work as well. And my father struggled with sinus problems, and the cold weather is most difficult when you have a business like dairy. You have to do it 24/7. And he got to be tired of the cold and saw on the TV and in the newspapers about taking your sinuses to Arizona. He had sinus problems. And on a trip to California, he came through Phoenix and spent some time and visited a dairy or 2. And on that trip, saw how with such a light annual rainfall, 6 to 7 inches a year, he figured with the irrigation, you could grow a fine crop and not ruin it with the weather that Wisconsin would get. They would grow great crops and sometimes not be able to bale hay, and even sometimes so wet that it was even difficult to get in and chop feed for silage and things like that. But he packed up his family, and we were just a family of 3 at that point. And I was 7.5 years old, and we got in the car and drove all the way to Arizona. I think it was December of 1959 when he arrived here, and left his all his earthly possessions on the back of a brand new pickup, and then went to California, to where I had an uncle from my mother's side of the family, her oldest sister, and they brought me there to stay for a month or two while they went back to Wisconsin and closed shop. And so in Arizona, when he set out to Derry, he could not find a place that was close enough to church and Christian school. They were a very dedicated Christian family, and I had the benefit of Christian school. And so he started actually in a partnership in a boat business called Jupiter Boats and Motors, and did that for the first 18 months in Arizona. Liked that okay, but it was the first time in his business life that he ever got a bad check. And that really surprised him. In agriculture and handshake business, that really kind of shocked him, and the culture of Arizona was somewhat a shock to him in that regard. But all while he was in the boat business, he looked for opportunity to rent a dairy. And he found one in Scottsdale, the westmost western town in those days. And with the Scottsdale dairy, we rented it, and he had actually a lease purchase option on it, so he was hopeful to stay there as long as he wanted. And Scottsdale was ideally located kind of at the front end of the Salt River project. So the Roosevelt Dam, and then you've got the lakes below it, Apache Canyon, Sorrel Lake, and the last dam was Granite Reef. We were maybe one of the second farms that was non-Indian, because there's some Indian reservation ahead of us on the first deliveries of the Arizona Canal from the Granite Reef Dam. So my formative years in Scottsdale were for 13 years, from 61 to very early 1975. And we were placed by the Indian Bend Wash in the Arizona Canal, and that was kind of strategic for very good water. My father's well was not very deep, and it was the coldest water I drank from the ground in Arizona, and that worked pretty neat. But we lived by that Indian Bend Wash, and we had a terrible rainstorm, I guess, in the McDowell Mountains in our monsoon time, and we were flooded. And I was actually on vacation with my uncle from California that I had gotten to live with some years earlier. And I was on the Colorado River when the ranger boat came out and got me off the river and said, "You need to go home. Your family had to evacuate." And that was a very, surprising and shocking time for me. And I was fearful that maybe they didn't even make it out, because the ranger said, we don't know, it's just that we had a call to make sure you got home. So I did that. I was just a 20-year-old college student at Arizona State University. And when I got to meet my parents, it was probably the sweetest reunion that I ever had with them. And it was in my father's, business sense, and they had thought ahead. I have a younger brother, 13 years younger. They had let him stay in town, so I think the forecast of the big rain, they sensed that maybe there was some danger coming. And so when we got to go back to the dairy, he had turned the power off on both the house and the barn. And what was amazing is that when we went to look if we could turn the power on, not one of the motors that we needed to milk the cows got flooded out. It got right up to the wire, not to any of the switches. The only motor that we could not use was the manure pump that drained all the waste from the dairy barn and pumped it out to the farm fields for fertilizer. But so we were overflowing that, but we could milk our cows 14 hours late. So my father didn't, need to spend the money to find other places to milk, and we freight them away. And so that flood, while it was a very tough, difficult time to come back from, and he lost a lot of hay that had gotten wet on the bottom and stuff, he still made money that year.
Wow.
It was pretty neat. The effects of that flood caused him to have to eventually, with condemnation process with the city of Scottsdale, to widen the Indian Bend Wash. we were condemned, and so he had to exit Scottsdale. Maybe earlier than he would like to, because he had really improved the dairy, had the purchase option, and would like to have owned it. And so they had to negotiate with him as well as the leasehold owner, which by that time was a widowed woman who had been in the farming as well in Scottsdale. And so then we moved on to Chandler, and he built a very beautiful state-of-the-art place and moved there in 1975. And he had the first flush lanes in Arizona. That's where the cattle where they step out to eat on the concrete pads, was flush clean every day. And that was secondary use of the wastewater that was from the barn that washed the cows and washed up the barn. And so that would clean the concrete, and the cows so were cleaner and drier. And so it was a really state-of-the-art place, and he was one of the more efficient guys with that as far as labor. He milked 450 cows with just 2 full-time employees. I was a part-time employee still attending college. In those days I was in graduate school down at the University of Arizona. And so I had the benefit of helping him in the move, but also in the design of the place. And while I was studying agriculture down in Tucson, who was the land-grant college and where the extension was, it was some networking that I could help him with some final improvements and additions to the dairy and cattle cooling, things like that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So after that, because I know you had a dairy in Rainbow Valley,
Correct.
right? So
yes.
Did you go into partnership with your dad, or did you just set up on your own?
No, after graduate school, I had the opportunity of being a nutrition consultant in Chino, California. My master's degree was in dairy science, and the gentleman was named Dr. Daniel Loper. He was a PhD nutritionist, and he had formed a independent nutrition consulting company, and the dairies were transforming their feed rations from total premix of concentrates that the cattle need to produce as much milk as they do into total mixed type rations for dairies to buy their own simples and commodities, and then buy a mixer truck and grinders for maybe the forage to blend with it. And so he was really getting a lot of business and hired me as a nutrition consultant. So I spent 2 years at that, and I was still a single young man and attending a Christian Reformed church in the Chino Valley. They call that the Inland Empire now in California. And that's through the combination of all the Dutch Christian Reformed churches. We had a young adults group that met at a beach deal for a barbecue. And since I was one of the older guys in the single group of graduate students, still single, I managed the barbecue. And while I was doing the barbecue, all these pretty Dutch girls lined up, and I found my wife in that line. She had her bun ready for the condiments on it, and I just set her to the side and gave her the last, or second to the last one. I had the last one, and she dined with me. So when I met her, and we made plans, maybe a year and a half later we married from that first meeting. We decided, and I kind of led the discussion about I would like to raise my family on the farm. I really missed it in my college years, as well as the work I had done in Chino. I was working on the farm, but saw the families and all the benefits of raising kids on a farm with life skills, work ethic. And it was, when I asked her parents for her hand in marriage, I told them that we probably wouldn't stay in the same area because the nutrition work required a lot of travel, and I wanted to have my own farm. Mm-hmm. And that's when I told them it was probably not going to be California, because it looked like a harder place to start with the expensive real estate and the nicer weather that they have. And I told them it was either Idaho, where I had a lot of experience in customers with nutrition, or Arizona. They let me know they preferred Arizona, and I told them I did too, because of the warmer weather. So Once Diane and I married, we started our dairy in Chandler the first 5 years in a rented place very close to my father, and then bought our place in Rainbow Valley in 1986. And dairied there 29 and a half years, almost 30 years.
Okay. And then after that, did you sell the dairy, and like how are you still involved?
So yes, I had the opportunity of selling some real estate. That we had some other farming interest in Buckeye, close to the dairy, maybe 5-6 miles from it. And we had another dairy family interested in our farm ground, and we packaged the dairy that I was on for almost 30 years with that. We saw that that dairy was landlocked and not going to compete with the size and scale of dairies that were, getting bigger, and that affects cost of production. And so our desirous farm ground got me a better price for selling the dairy. I didn't want to leave it with my 3 sons because I felt like it was a declining asset. Is why we sold that. And our last load of milk was January of 2016. So now I've been out of the milk and cow business for 8 years. We followed up with buying some farm ground and some desert ground that we developed a feed yard on to raise dairy heifers for other guys. The milking business was just looked like in for some tough times, and so we decided to just feed cattle for some years and developed a 2,800 head feedlot for raising dairy heifers.
Okay. So your son managed that?
Yes, yeah. Well, my oldest son was actually became later a partner in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and I know you had. I'm pretty sure you had some type of farm in, where was it? Was it Texas or?
Oh yeah. So when my oldest son came back from Dordt College, which he studied agribusiness there, he was managing the day-to-day on the dairy. That kind of gave me the opportunity to spend a little more time in real estate. And so I did do some trading of some of the ground that I had bought in Arizona that was in the path of future development that we went in out of state. Initially I sold some just west of Buckeye, and my first out-of-state farm was in Corcoran, California. We were kind of looking at that as a potential maybe dairy site for the future for one or both or all 3 of my sons. And then the environmental, I guess, political environment there was tough to where we kind of thought better of that. While we had bought that farm at a very low time, my neighbor was a pistachio orchard, and they sold to some, I think it was Saudi Arabians, and my farm was the same kind of ground, and we had the opportunity to sell that at a nice profit after owning it about 4 or 5 years. And after that, then we moved that money from California to the Texas Panhandle, which that was a pretty neat area to go to. They had just built a cheese plant, so we were still feeling like a dairy family that might present opportunities for the next generation in that purchase. While we were in Texas, their regulations started changing with the declining water table and stuff there. And so while we were there, we liked the farming and the return on investment we were getting there. And Texas doesn't have state income tax, and in California I was paying non-resident state income tax on the rent that I was gaining from there. And so that was a very nice move. But while the water problems started to get where you actually couldn't grow the same crop selection, corn took maybe 22 to 28 inches a year, and when we could use a full 28 when we bought the farm, by the time we made a decision to sell it, I think 4 or 5 years later, we were down to 22 inches, so corn wasn't as abundant of a selection, and corn was what that farm was about. The family I bought it from, I leased back to, and they were corn on corn people and did a great job at it. And they actually encouraged me because they knew that values of the land were very favorable to me selling. And so the people there were very good to me to tell me, if I were you, I'd move on. There's going to be some well problems here that you're not going to want to be living with, and will affect your return on investment. And my son Calvin, the oldest, he actually spent a full crop year there, and decided that he wasn't ready to move to Texas either. He came back, and the social life was maybe a little anemic compared to the west of Phoenix and Maricopa County.
Alrighty. And so how are you today still involved in agriculture?
So my occupation switched from dairyman to agribusinessman. I guess that's the best way to describe somebody that buys and sells farms. I'm at risk in a little bit of growing alfalfa and selling that either retail or for export. And so I still have lots of farm ground to go out and check and clean up. And one of the things when you buy farm ground in the path of development, you will have farms messier than the way you like to farm and keep it up. So I have job security and picking up trash and weeding and spraying weeds and keeping ahead of things. But yeah, we've been blessed to be able to buy and sell farms. They've paid bills when the cattle business could get disappointing at times.
Okay. All right. I think that's interesting. I've never heard your full story, so it's really cool to see how you've moved across the valley, leaving Arizona, coming back. That's really cool. So in schools here in Arizona, students often learn about 5 C's: cotton, cattle, climate, citrus, and copper. So these C's played an important role in the early economy of Arizona.
Yes.
And 3 clearly have to do with agriculture: cotton, cattle, and citrus. Sorry, there's so many I forget which is which. So it's fair to say that agriculture has been embedded in Arizona from its start. What can you tell us about the history of agriculture in Arizona?
Okay, well, so I'm kind of a student of that history, and actually with going to college in Arizona State, my undergrad work for 3 years of my 4, and then for my graduate degree, I got to learn a lot of the history and the agrarian heritage. And while Arizona has got the 5 C's, actually climate really is a big part of the other 3, agriculture. So I would tell you, my father couldn't believe that you could cut alfalfa year round, right? When you're in Wisconsin, you park the equipment and hope it starts in the spring and to see the wheels turn year round. In some crops, we call it double cropping. So a corn crop could have a second corn crop, a fall corn that wouldn't yield as much, or sorghum or a milo that would follow it a little shorter day and maybe less water usage. So the 4 C's drew my father to Arizona on his trip to California. That climate was a big part for him, not just taking his sinuses there, but to be able to bale hay with leaf in it year round was pretty special. And he felt like the cattle wouldn't eat as much in the less than cold winters. And he was right. And in Wisconsin, when it's icy out, even though you have them in a barn, they do eat more for heat increment. And that heat increment causes them to produce less milk. And so in Arizona, that was our best milk production time. It's in the summer when you give up some milk production because it's a bit hotter than what Wisconsin was in the summer.
Okay. So the agriculture here isn't just limited to cotton and cattle and citrus.
Right.
So what are some other crops or animals that do well here?
Well, so cattle ranching is really rich in Arizona, and that a lot of that's on state land. Usually, a rancher will have some deeded ground that's contiguous to state land, so they have long-term leases, and those are very gritty people, and have done a great job. And they're probably more of those left in terms of generationally. We're going on 3 to 4, 5, 6 generations. There's probably more of them in the cattle business than there is in the dairy business or even the farming around the irrigated areas.
Okay.
Yeah, and the diversity of crops here, citrus has kind of gone away now with the development of ground, especially in Maricopa County on the east side. Mesa was full of citrus. Arcadia, East Phoenix, they call it the Arcadia area, a lot of citrus, and in somewhat western Scottsdale there. But citrus, some people have their own tree, but I think Sunkist shut down maybe 10 or 15 years ago when they made orange juice and packaged and boxed fruit and stuff. So citrus has kind of left us. Cotton in the last, for sure 10, but even 20 years ago started being more limited. And now in the last 10 has become so limited that there's only, I think, 3 gins left in Maricopa County. And then Pinell County still has a couple of gins. So when the infrastructure leaves, that's probably a crop that Arizona won't go back to.
Okay.
The infrastructure to package and process it
Right.
on the end deals there. So, and then what's really happened big is produce and truck farming. That's huge on the southwestern part of the state. Yuma, I guess, who grows maybe half of the lettuce during January, February, the cold winter months for the whole United States, and maybe even has some exports.
Wow.
So yeah, and so produce, the climate's a big part of that, but excellent water as well, which a lot of that it is surface water, right? So that's some of the best water from the dams.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think my husband told me that a lot of the wheat grown in Yuma actually gets shipped to Italy to make pasta.
Durum wheat.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought that was funny that a lot of the wheat grown here gets shipped over to Italy.
And wheat is a winter crop that sometimes is a good rotational crop. To keep weed control and stuff, and is good for the produce that they grow when the wheat's done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that double crop thing.
Yeah, it kind of like recharges the soil for the produce.
Yeah.
Okay. So if cotton is going away because the infrastructure is leaving, well, first of all, why is the infrastructure leaving?
Well, so the cotton market, it's a world market in all of our products, and we, I guess, taught China and to grow cotton really well. But also when you go to the store, there's a lot of things that aren't cotton. Even the stuff that is a small percentage of cotton. Some of the new modern fibers are better to travel and not wrinkle as much as cotton. I still am very prejudiced towards cotton. My body, when I sweat, breathes better with wearing cotton, and even if cotton shows it and maybe makes wet spots, that still cools better than these fibers that maybe look nicer on you, but you're dripping down to your underwear in shirts like that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So what would replace the cotton as it leaves?
Alfalfa has largely, and while alfalfa has a great market with a lot of cattle and a whole bunch of horses still, and there's a lot of people in Maricopa County, but the whole state, that have enough resources to support horses, which are very nice in recreation. A great way to see Arizona is on horseback, without the noise of these razor and quad runners and stuff. and the alfalfa also has gone to export. And we've had some criticism about that we're shipping our water. Well, there's some truth in that, but cotton was also a hugely exported commodity in my lifetime. And so I don't know if we're exporting more water with alfalfa than we did with cotton, or it's very similar or equal. But since it's a world market, I don't think that exporting bothers me that much. The thing that does bother me though is that foreign ownership of our farms. I would like to see it limited. In Canada they do. Foreign ownership is, I think, has a 10-acre maximum. Here there's no limit, and I think that food security is a big part of national security, is why I would love to see that limited. But as far as limiting export, I think we just have to be smart at trading and doing it correctly.
Okay. Why do you think that foreign ownership isn't limited?
I'm not sure. I really don't know why.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe the politicians aren't as much aware of it. And you know, the farmer vote is less and less the more people we bring here.
I also saw a statistic the other day, I don't know how true it is, but I saw it, and it said that only a small percentage of farmers actually go vote, because a lot of them are, like, it's right in the middle of harvesting or planting, or like they're always busy, and so it's really hard for them to get out and go vote. So I don't know, there's always mail-in, but I don't, you know, farmers are busy, and I don't think people understand quite how busy they are. So when I was a kid, I learned that the Hohokam tribe here in Arizona, they were here before the white man came, I guess.
Right.
They built large canals, some of which are still in use today, and they used it for irrigating their farmland. So that was the initial introduction into agriculture here in the valley. But how did early farmers build upon this system? How did they improve farming here?
Well, in the 1800s, I think they learned from the Hohokams and how they did the canal systems, and by the late 1800s, the farmers got together and decided to build a big dam that became the Roosevelt Dam. That's pre-statehood. We were just a territory in those days. These farmers, and I can't imagine how in a world that communication was difficult, right? Not even phones in those days, how they could get together that good to build a mammoth project that the Roosevelt Dam was. And it was actually finished pre-statehood. It was dedicated in, I think, March 18 of 1911, and we became a state February 14 of 1912. So while our agrarian heritage and the farmers would leverage and finance to be able to build something that big, and with the dam came a canal system that was huge, right? The Arizona Canal, and I had the opportunity to live on that canal that actually flooded my father's dairy that we talked about earlier. That was an amazing resource for us as a state. Incredible. And that irrigation water is what drew my father here before we even knew the history of it. And the sacrifice that those farmers gave, I mean, not just to finance it, but the people that built that dam, some of them are buried in that early concrete. And that dam has been expanded since then and more or less rebuilt, and for safety reasons, I like that, but also for the resource of more water that it has. In that 4-lake system, there's 3 below Roosevelt Lake, was just a great blessing for Phoenix to become the capital. At first, Prescott was the capital, that moved to Tucson, back to Prescott, and then finally Phoenix. It was, I think, the Roosevelt Dam and the Salt River Project Valley and farming that made Phoenix, I think, the epicenter for future growth.
Okay. Yeah, so without farmers, Phoenix probably wouldn't look how it does today.
Wouldn't be the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was incredible to me for that project to happen in the time that it did, you know, and not have all the resources that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yes.
So talking about water specifically, how has the availability of water changed and affected farming here?
It's been regulated here in Arizona back to the late 70s, early 80s. And it was Grady Gamage Jr., but probably by influence of his father, who was an attorney. And there's Grady Gamage on the Arizona State University campus that was had his name on a lot of the first regulatory, programs that came out. And when they did that, my father was a dairyman in Chandler, had some farm ground with it. They gave water, or I guess a sign based on the amount that you used. And so you signed up. And you could actually say that, you know, my father's dairy was built to be able to expand. He got more water rights assigned to him for future growth as well on his dairy. The dairy water rights were type 2 for animal use, and then the water rights on his Salt River Project irrigated ground that was contiguous to the dairy was type 1. Type 1 was formulated to stay with the ground, and it still does in the AMAs, active management areas. And type 2 is a water right that can move from one animal operation to another, or even sell it to a golf course who needs water rights for irrigating, you know, and sprinkling the golf courses and stuff like that. So that water right deal is what has gotten us, you know, more efficient. So they started regulating. We had to do water reports based on our crop usage, our cattle usage as well, how many acre feet that my father's 450 milk cows drank, and so the regulation of that has really helped and sets the standard for the future. And as we lose more farmers to development, they actually gain some water when they retire farm ground, that they can build more houses than they can fit on an acre, opening up ground that doesn't maybe have water rights somewhere else. But then that takes maybe the type 2 purchase rights to do that, or to file for type 1s to move. And I've heard some success in that, especially with big corporations, but when they do that, they lose some of the type 1 that was originally grandfathered with the farm ground.
Okay. Big corporations as in farming corporations?
No, the development stuff.
Oh, okay.
Motorola was one of the big companies in my lifetime.
Okay.
And they bought some farm ground and needed some water rights south of my father's dairy in Chandler. They got that done.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. How many current farm families do you know who have been involved in farming for 75 years or more, who are still in Arizona? Like how common is it for a farm to stay within a family, or for families to move on from farming?
Well, since I'm 72 years old, I know a fair amount. I didn't quantitate that when I got a purview of your questions. Right where we're sitting here, the Arizona Dairy Company by the Morrison brothers, I know are beyond 100 years. Mm-hmm. I have a ranching family friend in Cottonwood. They got the Century Award. They're over 100 years in ranching. And I'll bet there's more ranch families than there are dairy families left with a 75 or 100 year status. So there are many of them still connected.
Okay. So is family farming, or like multi-generational family farming, the norm in Arizona?
It still is to some extent, but it's probably they've incorporated for business and tax reasons, and their efficiency has brought maybe multiple sons when they would have broke off in the old days on their own little dairy, that they stay in a bigger dairy producing operation for efficiency reasons.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Are there any farms in this state that you know of that are not family owned and operated?
Yes. Fondamont is the Saudi Arabian one that we have heard on our news about the exporting of water, and there's others as well, and I don't remember them by names anymore, and yeah, there's quite a few large corporations. When you get a place when development makes the farm ground worth more than it is for farming, then a lot of times moving further out would be consolidation and more expansion to that. And even some of the families that would incorporate are maybe prone to sell to a bigger corporation, and some of those are so big they're public.
Okay. Does Arizona hold agricultural importance for the entire country?
Yes, especially in produce.
Okay.
We were especially in cotton, and like we spoke before, that has been more limited. And I don't see produce going away for quite some time yet. I think the prices that they have to pay for rent and the price of their fresh produce products will stay, I think, viable for a couple generations beyond.
Okay. So if Arizona didn't grow produce, would there be a lack of produce in the country, do you think?
I think we will get better at maybe some greenhouse work and hydroponics, things like that. So I think the future can be without Arizona, but yeah, I think if it went away suddenly, it would be a void.
Okay.
We would pay the most for a salad we had.
Okay. Looking ahead to the future, do you see farmers in Arizona being pushed out, or do you think they'll stay around for a long time?
Yes and yes. I think the development price has had some families cash in here, go somewhere else for the next generation that's interested in farming, but some have the ability they've sold so much to go further out and stay right here in Arizona as long as they can. So I think, and also, Arizona is only, I think, 17 or 18% deeded ground, while the farms are certainly affected by the land values to sell deeded ground, and we're the first for the developers to want to go to. The state owns a good size amount of farmable ground that is not available for development. And so I think some farm families or corporations or both of those will stay on that state ground that has some neat water rights that was preserved in the active management stuff from the 80s. So I think, yeah, generationally, 4 or 5 more generations, especially on state lease stuff. But yeah, the deeded ground is getting so valuable that there won't be as many families that stay here in Arizona.
Okay. If farmers start to move out onto state leased land, is that going to affect the ranchers? Because ranchers here have to use a huge amount of land to graze their cattle because there's not as much grass and stuff. So do you think farmers moving to state lease will affect ranching?
I think so. I do, yeah, because the ranchers sure rely on irrigated ground to get them through dry years that the ground they graze is not yielding what they need. So yeah, I think there's some limiting factors for the cattle business as more of the irrigated ground goes away.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we end?
I think I've had a great run in my lifetime. and as far as enjoying the agriculture and seeing the generational change. And the thing that, Maricopa County was maybe a little over 500,000 people when I was 7 years old and moved here, and now we're over 5 million, maybe 5.5 million. While I don't like sitting in gridlock on the freeway, the value of the land that I've been able to buy and sell is maybe something that makes me tolerate that more. But I hope that agriculture stays here for some time, and while it does, I plan to be in it while I'm semi-retired, as far as not working as hard as I did as a dairyman. I'm still in business, and maybe that's mostly the real estate stuff, but I like my identity in that, in agriculture. So, and I believe that agriculture is a great future for many families, and I heartily support 4-H and FFA kids, because some of them didn't have the benefit that I did or my kids had to grow up with the raising animals. And it's not just our food supply, it's life skills too. Still working with your hands and equipment and things like that. So, but other than that, I have nothing else.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You bet.